Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We are in the home stretch for seniors, so coming up to the January 1 deadlines. Of course, there are some deadlines afterwards, but I like to think of all of you out there finishing up your supplements and submitting all of your applications so that you're done. So come January, all you're doing now is waiting. So shoot for that. We are going to be answering your questions in the second part of the show, but before we get to that, we have another one of our stories from our college coach advisors here, and I'm very excited to have my colleague Jen Simons, who is a former admissions officer from Tufts, Northeastern, Barnard, and Connecticut College. But she's not here to talk about any of that today. She's here to talk about her story, which is making the choice to go to an all-women's college, Wellesley College. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Elizabeth. So good to see you.
You too. All right. So the goal here is just for our listeners to understand how you made that decision. And so I guess my first question for you is, how did you become interested in attending a women's college? And I think from talking to you that really you became interested in Wellesley, less the idea of a women's college, but can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So, obviously, based on what you've said about all the places I've worked and just looking at me, if you're watching this or hearing my voice, you know that I'm somewhat older. I applied to college a long time ago. So things were mostly different, but I think a lot of things are still the same. So I grew up on Long Island, and on Long Island, what we did was we applied to large universities. I mean, that was sort of, you went to a SUNY, or you went to Cornell or NYU, or, like a big state. Penn State was very popular. And so that was sort of what I had in my mind based on just what my friends were doing and peers were doing. And so, my stepbrother, Jeff, actually was a student at MIT. And the summer before my senior year, the summer going into my senior year, I went to visit him at MIT. And he, it was the end of the summer, and he lived in a fraternity house. And of course, I came and everybody was like, "Oh, Jeff's little sister, so cute, really nice to me and everything." And I will never forget this because it was like just one of those moments where we were in the fraternity house, and there was a group of female people, and I'll tell you that it's relevant. And so, I said, "Oh, I'm a senior in high school, and I'm looking, at colleges, and do you like MIT?" And they said, "Oh, we don't go to MIT, we go to Wellesley." And I said, "Oh, Wellesley, what's it like to go to an all-girls college?" And they just said, like, without any sort of like judgment or affect, they said, "Well, a women's college." Like,
Yep.
and that could have turned someone off, but for me it was like, "Oh wow, I want to be a woman, like that's like really cool, I like that." And so I traveled with a friend of mine later in the fall to visit. She was visiting Brandeis and I was visiting Wellesley, and we went, and it was like I walked onto the campus, and it was like just everything made sense. Like, people talk about that moment that they have, and not everybody has it, but I was like, why wouldn't someone want to go to this unbelievably beautiful, nice, like, place where people are so friendly? And it was also interesting to me because, people now talk about women's colleges. Like, I don't want to go someplace that's not diverse. Like, it was the most diverse environment. Like, there were women from every imaginable background, country, state. Like, it was so interesting. I saw women like that I had never, I met people that I had never met before. I mean, I grew up, again, on Long Island. It wasn't the most like sophisticated existence, but for me, it was much more diverse than a lot of other places would have been. And so, yes, I was very fixated on Wellesley. So that sort of became my choice. But now, I worked at Barnard. By the way, my mother actually didn't want me to apply to Barnard. I thought about applying to Barnard too. But she thought, I grew up in New York, and let's get out. I spent every weekend, with my friends in the city. Let's get out of the city. And I was like, okay. And so, I didn't even really look at the others. In retrospect, I think I would have, it wasn't like college admissions wasn't the same thing then. It was just, so, but for me, it was really just this amazing choice that I somehow, I think, had the foresight to make. And Beth, I think I told you this, like, now, I've been doing this a long time. This is, admissions has been my career, college counseling is my career. And people sometimes ask me if I'm ever, sort of judgmental, like when somebody says like they went to a certain school. I'm an extremely judgmental person, like, yes, so they ask me knowing that this is who I am. But do I ever judge people based on where they went to school? And absolutely not, with one exception. So I don't care if you went to, a school that I've never heard of. I don't care if you've gone to a major university. I don't care if you've gone to an Ivy League. I care if you tell me that you went to a women's college, and I don't care if it's Agnes Scott or Mills or Wellesley or Bryn Mawr. Did you hear my Long Island accent?
Oh yeah, I love it.
All right, Bryn Mawr, Smith, I don't care. I'm gonna like you more just as a result of like that. You're my sister, and I don't know if all women's college, graduates feel like that, but there is this really wonderful bond, not just within my Wellesley siblings. And I guess they are siblings now. We used to call them sisters, and sorry about that. So by Wellesley, you are my sibling. If you went to a women's college, there is a connection. We understand each other, and I respect you. And I think you're better. Sorry, I'm just gonna say it. So.
Right. So that's a challenge for all the men out there listening, but here's a question for you. So you had a vision, which often does happen. And I actually had that same moment when I went to the college I ended up attending. I had visited so many and they all seemed great and they were fine and they made my list. And then I went to, at the last hour, the place where I wound up, and something about that just went, oh, like the skies opened up and I said, this is where I've meant to spend the next 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure I buy into that. I had a wonderful 4 years. I probably could have had a wonderful 4 years elsewhere. So you had that moment, but what, obviously the experience lived up to the expectation or possibly even exceeded it. What for you makes a woman's college, in your opinion, such a great place for young women to spend that 4 years?
Yeah, so I will answer that question, but I will also start by saying, in many, many ways, it is no different from any other school. So I'm sort of not answering the way that you want to, I will, but really, I didn't constantly feel like, oh, I'm at a women's college. Then I would go and visit. I had a boyfriend my freshman year who went to Colby College, and I would go, not that there's anything wrong with Colby, but like, it's a fabulous school, but I would go to visit him and I'd be like, it's a little like dirtier, it's a little noisier, like it's all the stereotypes. But I don't know, like I just felt like for me there was something incredibly liberating. It sounds like so old school about not having that sort of male gaze, like what we used to talk about in the day, is like that male gaze that like you could be 100% yourself, and you could still be that now at a co-ed school, but you weren't missing anything because you could still have male friends. I was a little sister in a fraternity at MIT. I spent, the summer, a lot of my friends were guys, and that was really good, but I could sort of leave that. You know what I mean? Like I could go home. I felt like everything was there for us as leaders. I think there also is an element for me of enormous pride when I look at the graduates of women's colleges and the success they've had, not just Wellesley, but all the women's colleges. And really, when you look in the industries, like different industries and business and everything, it's like, I think that women's college graduates have accomplished a disproportionate amount. And I can't imagine that it's not because of that feeling that you have from the very beginning of your academic college career of like, this is your world, and this is, it's the brass ring is you. I'm using all these like cliches, but like it's yours to grab, right? So you felt really, really empowered at best. And then there was also just this feeling of like, this is an amazing college, like forget the women's part of it, and this is just an amazing place to learn. I actually, in writing blogs about women's colleges for our wonderful blog, I feel like women's colleges have had to try harder to do better. It's like that old saying about like, I'm really dating myself, like I'm 110 years old, but like that old saying about like, Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did, but she did it backwards and in heels.
Yes,
I think the
yes.
women's colleges that still exist have had to be so flexible and so creative and nimble and assertive in their, being who they are. And so I don't know, like for me, the other thing I will say, I'm sorry, and you could just make sure I'm quiet when I need to be, but is that the friends that I have, and I don't know that I've only had one college experience, but I think there's a really, really strong bond with, graduates of a women's college. Like you're connected in a way that feels more meaningful for the lack of, I don't know, male identified people.
But it is an interesting point that you make, right? You had one college experience, and so you can certainly talk to friends about their college experiences, but you can only judge on the one you had, and the one you had really felt incredibly impactful, it sounds like, to you and to your life. And when you were talking about, the leadership opportunities and things like that, that's always something that strikes me, because I recall being a freshman and there was a kid who I was about to say lived in my dorm, but he didn't live in my dorm. He was just one of those people who was great at getting to know everybody. And I remember that he was running for office. And I remember thinking, I've never really ran for much of anything in my lifetime, but I remember thinking that seemed so daunting to me in our huge class that I would never have put myself out there like that. And yet I feel like at a women's college, I really might have. I think I had that in me, an interest in it, but I was too, no, that's, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to put myself out there. And when I think about women's colleges, one of the things I do think about is that kind of opportunity, where you just get to kind of, and I don't know that it's true anymore that women feel like they can't do that. That's really, frankly, my own problem and my own hang up, nothing to do with the guys kind of elbowing me out of the way. But it is true that when you're at an all women's college, all of the leaders are going to be female because it's an all women's college. And there's something kind of intriguing about the possibilities that opened up for women who maybe wouldn't have thought about doing that with the male gaze around, right? When you say under the male gaze, it makes me think of Under His Eye, and we don't need to get into The Handmaid's Tale here, but
But I
yeah.
think though that's too, like when Hillary was running for president, like before everything, I was like, oh, I wonder if women's colleges oddly are going to struggle because they're not going to be seen as necessary when we have a woman president in the US. And then everything sort of went backwards with the Me Too movement. And, I felt like if anybody dares to say that women's colleges are not relevant, you're not living in this time.
Right.
You're not in this reality. And I think the fact that the first, woman running for president was a graduate of a woman's college, I think that's not a coincidence. Kamala, it's interesting, she's HBCU. Like there is something to that sort of support that you get from being with people that are similar to you.
Right.
And I also, finally, I think women's colleges are so supportive for women who are both timid or afraid to assert themselves, but they're also excellent for women that love to assert.
Right.
Like there's not just one type of student that goes to a women's college. It's really nice that way.
How many of I have had a few students apply to women's colleges in my time doing this work. It isn't a choice that everyone's willing to make. I shared with you before we started taping, I was utterly unwilling to consider an all women's college, and I have quite a few, including Wellesley, that I grew up not very far from. Didn't want to visit, was just, nope, not going to consider it. And which I think is actually, again, wouldn't change my college experience, but one of the reasons I think it's unfortunate is because I probably could have spent a lot less on my college education, because there is traditionally they put together great financial packages for applicants. But what do you say if you have a student who you actually think really would flourish in an all women's college, understanding that you're not trying to get people to go where they're not going to be happy, but what are the things you would say to someone to at least look into before dismissing the idea of a women's college?
Well, that's actually the first thing I say to all the students that I think would be okay with it. You have to go visit. I mean, now COVID has screwed everything up with that, but you have to actually sort of be on that campus and see what it feels like and meet the women and talk to them and ask them questions if you can, or now virtually. You have to at least try. There are three sort of versions of responses that I get from my students about applying to a women's college. The first is, oh no, 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 like no way. And then you
Right.
just fine, like okay. And then and the truth is, my best friend in the whole world from Wellesley, she's my sister, like I love her more than anything. She wasn't terrifically, like she should have gone to a rah football school.
Mm-hmm.
That's what she needed. It wasn't like a women's college, not a women's college. She needed a place that was like, just a different culture.
Mm-hmm.
But so if you're like no, then no, that's fine. Then there are women that say, well, I'll apply to Barnard because I have Columbia right there. It's not really a women's college. Well, yes, it is. Like it is.
Right.
So then you could sort of work with that. And then there are women who, for either they consider themselves feminists or there's a particular department or something that they're really, gravitating to. I think you just have to sort of suspend the fact that it's a women's college and look at it for other things and find other things that you feel appeal to you. And then when you're sort of making the decision to apply and making hopefully the decision to enroll, then you could sort of factor that in. But really the fact that it is a women's college, while it's very empowering and exciting and wonderful and all that, it's not a reality of your day-to-day existence where you're constantly thinking, I am at a women's college. This is just your college experience. Right. Try to remind them of that. Things like location, size, major, all the other factors are more relevant, to the search than the women's college.
Right. I love it. I think it's great advice. And I love that. I love the story though, that, oh, what's it like to go to an all girls college? Well, a woman's college. And hey, I want to be a woman. That sounds like a great idea. I mean, why not start there? I love that. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure. And I apologize to anyone who went to Colby College in the late 80s, early 90s. It was not dirty. It was really a magical place, I'm sure. So let me for saying that. Okay.
You just had one weekend. All right. We are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are answering your questions. So don't go away.